Welcome in, everyone, to another episode of my Dynasty Fantasy Football YouTube channel. This time we have Dynasty Bias. Let's jump into the first one. T. Higgins. Now, he's been in the news lately because the Bengals just decided to put the franchise tag on him. Now, I think that some, not really with reality, we could call them delusional, Dynasty managers thought that Higgins would be a free agent this offseason and somehow would sign with the Chiefs or something like that. That was never, ever going to happen. Never. It was not in my mind at all. The Bengals, they have a good cap situation, especially with the cap rising. Jamar Chase, contract, cheap rookie deal this year, 5th-year option 2025. Joe Burrow's cap hit, only $29.7 million this year. Higgins, $21.8 million on the franchise tag. Probably lower than what he want on a long-term extension. Tyler Boyd's a free agent. They're going to let him walk. They have Andre Yoshivas, Charlie Jones. They could sign a cheap veteran. They don't need Boyd at his $10 million or whatever he was. So $21.8 million for Higgins. It's a decent value. Let's look at his career. 2020, 67 catches, 908 yards, 6 touchdowns in 16 games. Then, oddly enough, 2021 was the best year when Jamar Chase came into the NFL. 74 catches, 1,091 yards, and 6 touchdowns in 14 games. Then 2022 kind of duplicated it, but it took him 16 games to do it. And then 2023 was a down year with the injuries, with Joe Burrow being hurt, all of that. So kind of hurt T. Higgins' value. Now, as you saw from that, people act like T. Higgins has missed, you would, from the discussion about him, you would think he missed 20 games, 30 games in his career. No, he hasn't. He only missed 3 games in 2021. There was the canceled game in 2022 and 5 games this year. So less than 10. He's just gone out early in a few critical spots, and he's burned fantasy managers. And of course, the high profile 2022 championship week, even though that really wasn't his fault, has left a sour taste in fantasy managers' mouths, which is why, without rookies included, his current keep trade cut value is wide receiver 23. I have him at wide receiver 17. So it's important not to dismiss T. Higgins because he didn't become what we wanted. That's okay. Not every player is going to be Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson. Higgins is still just 25 years old. He's tied to Joe Burrow. In 2025, he's either going to stay here or become the best free agent market on the, in many years. They never hit the market, but he would be the best one too. So here's some trade ideas. T. Higgins, 24 third, 24 fifth for Jaden Reed and a 24 fourth. That was from DLF Trade Finder. And also for Roshan Johnson and Jameson Williams, that's a smash accept. I almost cannot believe that this is a real one. And then my idea for late 24 first, maybe, try 112, but if you can get it for even 110, I would absolutely do it for T. Higgins in a super flex league. Yeah, just try to make those trades for him because I think he's undervalued. Next one, Brock Purdy. Again, kind of in the news. I think people are frustrated with him because he didn't win the Super Bowl. That doesn't really matter for fantasy football. But he wasn't that great in the playoffs. It is fair to acknowledge it. Even though he went 2-1, he wasn't that great. 61.1% completion, 3 touchdowns and an interception, 7.17 yards per attempt. It's nothing special. But we have to remember that fantasy football is not played in the playoffs. It's played in the regular season. And in the regular season, he's been really good. When he took over as a starter in 2022, 67.1% completion, 13 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, 8.1 yards per attempt. That would have been top 5 in the league this year. And then this year, he upgraded everything. Everything was better. Touchdowns better, 31. Only 11 interceptions, 9.6 yards per attempt, 69.4% completion. He led the NFL in yards per attempt by 1.3 over Tua Tagovailoa, who was next. There's a reason he was an MVP candidate. I just think that because of his draft capital, people doubt that he's even good. He is good. We have to accept that. Now, he's actually rated decently in terms of quarterback. It's quarterback 12. I have him quarterback 13. The overall price is a little low. And it's mostly that the issue with Purdy is that I think some people don't see him as a franchise quarterback. And I also think that some people who lucked into Purdy, you just drafted him. You didn't have to spend anything to get him. They're not necessarily, you didn't have to love Purdy to acquire him. So there are definitely people selling for low values. Here's a couple. You can get him for Chris Godwin, Devonta Smith, and 24 fourth. While I love Devonta Smith, I would much rather have Brock Purdy in Superflex League. And then this one, Bryce Young, Rachaad White, Jonathan Mingo, and 24 third. I just have no faith that Bryce Young is going to develop. I don't hate him, but I'd much rather just have Brock Purdy, the one sure Superflex asset here. And then I think you can get him for the 107 or 108 in Superflex. That's not going to be a premium asset, and I would definitely be down to make such a trade. Last one, Tucker Kraft. And honestly, I don't really understand the value of Tucker Kraft. Let's compare him to his teammate, Luke Musgrave on the Packers. Kraft, 31 catches, 355 yards, 2 touchdowns in 17 games. Musgrave, almost identical numbers, 34 catches, 352 yards, and touchdown in 11 games. But Kraft locked down a full-time feature role, which Musgrave never did. Never. Even when he was the starter, never did. Starting in week 12, Kraft played 80 or more % of snaps every single week, including in the playoffs, and even when Musgrave came back. In contrast, Musgrave played 27 and 28% snap shares in the 2 playoff games. So when it mattered, Kraft was the starter, not Musgrave. And Kraft was way ahead of him. Not a little bit, way ahead. But despite that, Musgrave holds more value. Tight end 14 on KTC, whereas Kraft is tight end 19. I have it reversed. Musgrave, tight end 18, and Kraft, tight end 50. I have Kraft ahead. Now, it would be one thing I would understand if Musgrave were drafted in the first round and Kraft were undrafted. But Kraft was a 3rd round pick and Musgrave was a 2nd round pick. They were close in value. So both were interesting college prospects. I slightly preferred Musgrave coming into the NFL, but it's not like they were worlds apart. Now, I have said a lot that it's hard to value any Packers receiving weapon highly because there's too many of them. Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed, Dontavian Wicks, they're all good, but none of them are that great. So they're all probably overvalued. But I did say that I would love to invest in whichever tight end is valued as the backup, which is Kraft, who's the one I prefer anyway. I think he's a great value. Now, trading directly for Kraft, players in this range, it's hard to do. If you could send a 3rd or even a couple of 3rd round picks, I would do it. But most of the time, if you're trying to acquire a player in this range, people are going to know what you're doing. The real thing to do is either throw Kraft in on a larger deal with bigger pieces involved, or my main advice here is to draft Kraft in new startups. That's the best way to acquire shares of him because he's way undervalued. And I still don't understand why Luke Musgrave is going 2 rounds earlier. I don't get it. Nothing on the field shows that. The playtime when both, after Kraft broke out, showed that they preferred Kraft. And when it mattered in the playoffs, Kraft, not Musgrave, was the lead option. So I don't understand why he should be 2 rounds lower. So I have him as a solid buy and draft target in startups. Now, if you like what we're doing here, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. That's the best way to support the YouTube. Additionally, you can sign up for Patreon, patreon.com/fantasyadvice. Hopefully the link is right on that little overlay that Dynasty Pandemic Clay made for me. Patreon.com/fantasyadvice. You can also donate on Buy Me a Coffee. There is an option to ask a question, donate, or buy the ranking spreadsheet. It's all there. And then, of course, there's my personal Venmo link, which you can just donate whenever you want. Additionally, all patrons get to ask questions for the show. And, for example, our Dynasty Trades episode, all of those trades came from patrons. So if you're a patron, you get to help direct the content we do here because at the end of the day, without the patrons, there would be no YouTube. So I always want to find ways to thank the patrons for their contributions. With that said, let's get into the Patreon questions. What is our expectation for Anthony Richardson? How does he compare to the crop of rookie quarterbacks coming in? For example, if we were drafting today and we had the 101, 102, and 103, I'd obviously prefer Caleb Williams over Richardson, and I'd prefer Marvin Harrison Jr. over Richardson as well. But if I had to choose between Richardson, Jaden Daniels, and Drake May right now, I would lean towards Richardson. I like his rushing upside, and I like that we saw him in the NFL, and he wasn't overmatched. He didn't look like a disaster. We know Bryce Young came in, and he looked like a disaster. We know that Anthony Richardson came in, he was able to compete. We have that piece of information. But Richardson, Daniels, and May are all in the same tier for me. They're all in the same tier. I don't have one as a big preference over another. They're all in that high-end asset, but not proven elite player tier for me. Whereas Caleb Williams will be in a tier above that, kind of right in that, on that line with Justin Herbert between elite and very good. They're like right in between those. There's that like mini tier. But yeah, I would definitely take Richardson over, anyone else like Malik Neighbors for sure. And those are the quarterbacks. Next one. Who are some second, third, fourth year players that you look to grab in later rounds of startups, move situations, new coach, potential lineup, change, et cetera, guys you can plug and play. So there's an article that I'm doing that's kind of in the works on this. The three players I'm going to talk about are Michael Mayer, who we talked about in a previous buy video, Kendra Miller, who I think showed down the stretch and has a chance to improve in year two, and then Wan'Dale Robinson, who I think is kind of forgotten about, but has actually been pretty good so far in the NFL. So those are the three players I would look at, and you got to check on my article to see more about those. This next question I actually thought was even more interesting. Who are some players you were totally out on last year that you're bought back in on, and vice versa? Players you were in on last year who you're avoiding this year. So this happens to me a lot. I don't have take lock. Here's players that I was totally out on that I'm now in on. Nico Collins, I dismissed him because his early career was bad. Year 3 breakout. Michael Pittman, I just didn't think it was going to work with Anthony Richardson. I didn't think the volume would be there. Clearly, that was not the case. Tajay Spears, I thought that the one ACL would be a much bigger problem than it was. It really didn't seem to be an issue at all. And then Jake Ferguson, I just didn't think he had much staying power, just didn't buy it. Clearly, he's the Cowboys starting tight end. There's no doubt about that. To reverse it, players I was in on that now I'm totally out. Christian Watson, thought he was an alpha wide receiver 1. Most certainly not. Treylon Burks, I love the prospect. I like what I saw in year 1, and then year 2 just never got off the ground. Tank Bigsby, he was a great prospect, really good rushing skills, and it just didn't translate. And Chig Okonkwo had his chance, blew it. So I'm not really interested in him anymore. Last question. If Malik Neighbors goes to the Giants, would he be moved down in your rankings? So the Giants are not the worst landing spot. He'd be the unquestioned wide receiver 1 there by a lot, day 1. Of course, Daniel Jones is not the best quarterback, but he's either going to figure it out this year or they're going to be moving on. Neighbors is a wide receiver 1 level prospect and would have been wide receiver 1 in every class from 2016 to 2023 outside of 2021, Jamar Chase, and this year, Marvin Harrison Jr. Neighbors turns just 21 in July. He's still super young. So I'm going to have Malik Neighbors probably no matter what in the same tier as A.J. Brown, Chris Olave, Brandon Ayuk. So he'll be a dynasty wide receiver 1 from the get-go, probably around 10 or 11. But yeah, the Giants are not the best case scenario. If Malik Neighbors went at like 5 to the Chargers, he could even be ahead of guys like A.J. Brown, Chris Olave in dynasty, even higher. So we'll have to see, but not really. He'll still be in my top 12, even on the Giants. Once again, I want to thank everyone for watching the video, the patrons for asking all of the questions. If you like what we're doing here, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Tell your friends about the channel. Share links to the videos on Twitter, X, or whatever social platform you want. And yeah, I just appreciate the audience for sticking with me throughout the offseason. I know there have been some quiet times, but you guys show up for every single video, and it means the world to me that you guys do that. So I love you all, and I will see you all later. Peace out.